Thank you for having me. This is a really tough act to follow, as you can well guess. Rick and I spent the whole night last night talking about all the people we knew in common, all of whom were astronauts. So I'm going to start out a little bit differently than I thought I was going to start out today, just to tell you that what we're going to talk about today is some research that some research that we've done at Berkeley that have led to some conclusions that we've input into several organizations, and they have become safer. There is today about a 20-year body of research on what we call high reliability organizations. And that research is part of it, is what I want to talk about. But I also want to tell you that this research began in the U.S. Navy with its carrier aviation program. So for quite a long time, we were studying airplanes that go on and off decks at quite a rapid rate of aircraft carriers. And then the next organization we went to study was NASA. And NASA has this program called the Space Program. We were interested in the space program, but we were also interested in some other things. And I only tell you that by way of saying you'll hear some words come out of my mouth that came out of Rick's mouth, because what we basically did in the basic research was chart what the Navy knew it did very well and what NASA knew it did very well. And we actually gave those things names and conceptual boxes to put them in. And then we could tell managers what they needed to do very well. By way of another place is we then went into the commercial maritime industry. So I've been on rigs, and I've been on tankers, and I've done all, in fact, I've climbed up and down the sides of tankers, which I never want to do again. And so that's by way of a start. But let me first give you an agenda and what we're going to talk about. The unexpected happens. It happens to us all. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Then I'm going to define a high reliability organization for you. And I'm going to talk about the resilience and the importance of resilience and adaptation in these situations. So it isn't, you're probably beginning to wonder now whether it's, do I follow all the rules precisely, or when can I break the rules, and what does it all mean, and this sort of thing. And then I want to discuss the leader's role in a high reliability organization. And then I just want to mention that all this goes on not just in single organization, but as in Rick's case, it goes on with interdependent departments or interdependent organizations. And that was also true. Rick focused on the individual or sets of individuals, but he didn't tell you what was happening down on the NASA floor in either the Apollo 13 case or his case. Lots was happening on the NASA floor. And I want to mention different system components just so that you have the notion that we're all living within an organization that's living within an organization. Then I want to move to leadership and talk about how transformational leadership works and challenges in team leadership, because you're on your rigs and in many other places in your companies, you're dealing with team leadership, whether you want to or not. And then 4 roles of team leaders and what makes e-leadership work. We've worked ourselves into a world in which we're talking really about e-leadership, which is electronic leadership. And that's one of the things that should be, and probably won't be, talked about with regard to Macondo. This is a statement that Captain Smith made before he sailed the Titanic on its maiden voyage. Basically what he says there is, I'm not a very interesting person, nothing very interesting has ever happened to me, so I'm not a very good person for you all to talk to. And then guess what happened? Well, now we want to ask the question, why do accidents happen at all? What's the simplest model of an accident happening? And there it is. I have a series of pieces of Swiss cheese. It's called the Swiss cheese model. So I have a series of pieces of Swiss cheese, and I lined them up so all the holes could be gone through by any object. And that's when an accident happens. Usually we don't have single point failures. I have never seen a single point failure. It's always one or two or three things coming together at the same time that cause the accident. Okay, we're going to get here to the definition of a high reliability organization. It's an organization which conducts relatively error-free operations over a long period of time, making consistently good decisions, resulting in high quality and high reliability operations. Now, certain organizations can go from high to low reliability in almost an instant. An organization can't go from low to high reliability in almost an instant. That can't be done. But you can go from high to low reliability in a very short period of time. You may go for many, many years. For example, we've gone in the United States now for over a year without a commercial aviation accident. As a result of that, and even a longer period of time before Captain Sullenberger put his plane into the Hudson River, we had gone for another long time without an accident. So that meant that commercial aviation in the U.S. is very high reliability. And even Sully's actions about putting his plane into the Hudson River spoke of a high reliability organization because he didn't kill anybody, he did it all by the book. But as a result of that, the U.S. Congress, many years ago, closed down the Office of System Safety at the Federal Aviation Administration. They hadn't had any accidents, so we'll just close this thing down, we don't need it anymore. Well, that's probably the very time when you do need it. The main message I want to leave you with today, if you leave with no other message today, I want you to leave with the message that these kinds of organizations require a great deal of resiliency and adaptation. So the answer to the question, do I always follow the rules, is probably, if the rules have been well designed, if everybody's practiced by the rules, if everybody's trained by the rules, and the rules keep you out of trouble, they're probably pretty good rules, right? Now, if something goes wrong and it suggests to you that you should break the rule, break the rule. Because the rule isn't going to serve any purpose for you. Okay, now we're going to talk about the leader's role in this whole thing. What should the leader be doing? Well, he or she should be cultivating resilience and adaptation. He or she should anticipate trouble spots, develop employee capability to improvise, improve organizational capacity and resources to do quick studies, develop swift trust, Rick talked to you about trust, and engage in just-in-time learning. Part of what the U.S. Navy sent over to the astronaut program was this notion, not only the notion of constant training, but the notion of the importance of trust, and Rick talked about that. It's extremely important. I don't have to like you, but I do have to trust you to get the job done. So that's extremely important. What else is the leader's role? Reluctance to simplify interpretation. He talked about having the big picture is essentially situational awareness. Well, situational awareness is the opposite of simplifying interpretations. It's having a larger picture of something that's going on. You have to ignore a lot of stuff, there's no doubt about that. But doing or ignoring too much stuff may find that you're also ignoring problems. You want to help employees restrain temptations to simplify. They should look at the environment and try to take a look at every aspect that they can. And to do this, establishes checks and balances, and things like adversarial reviews. Now, how do you do it? You say, well, I'm only one person. I can't do everything. And I would say to you, find a friend. So that a couple of you have the big picture, you're looking at different parts of the situation, you're seeing from different perspectives, and you get a larger picture that way. And by the way, don't forget to talk to each other. Okay, then what's the leader's role? Does the leader have any more roles? Yes, preoccupation with failure. In all the organizations we've been in which operate correctly, they're preoccupied with the possibility of failure. And NASA in the manned spaceflight program was no different than that. They were preoccupied with failure, and when they broke, it's because somebody put production pressure on them, and Challenger had to fly, and Challenger broke. And so it was production pressure, and I had been there, and all the screens, computer screens, I think the Challenger was STS 111, I can't remember, but it was, on all these screens was STS 119. And that was the flight that was to end our formal space program because we would have made our final delivery to the space station, and everyone was focused on that flight, not the flight that was taking off today. So they weren't preoccupied with the failure, potential failure of what's going on right now. The next, does the leader have any other roles? Yes. Sensitivity to operations. He or she needs to have the big picture, what's going on. One of the things I'm absolutely sure will come out in the BP thing is there are many, many people who simply didn't know what was going on. And therefore they got into trouble. There are a lot of things that you can speculate, nothing that can be said about the management of BP's operation in the Gulf because we don't know it yet, because the litigation hasn't started. When the litigation starts, we'll get a bigger story. But sensitivity to operation, pay close attention to operations, but don't micromanage. But pay close attention. Be the big picture. Be the guy that's there who has the ability to keep the big picture. Let somebody else fly the airplane off the deck of the ship. Captain shouldn't be doing that anyway. Make sure everyone values organizing to maintain situational awareness. If you could tell a nursing team what is situational awareness, you could get them to maintain it. Because if you say this is having a broader picture of the environment so you can spot things that will undoubtedly go wrong, you can also spot things that are going right so you can capitalize on them. That's what you need to do. And then you need to use resources so people can see and comprehend what is happening. And that's why I said, you think you're the single leader who's going to do the job all alone? Find a friend. Get those resources in there. And they're often people resources. We have any more roles for the leader? Well, organize around expertise. I've seen so many times when the guy with the most stripes, he's going to do the whole job. I'm the captain, I'm doing the job. Well, that's the wrong way to be the captain. The captain's the one with the big picture. Remember, I told you about the big picture. He should have other guys that he feels are well-trained to do the jobs that exist where the rubber meets the road. And he should understand, he should make sure that they're well-trained to do those jobs and make sure they're doing those jobs. So you want decisions to migrate to those with the expertise to make them, and you want to avoid rigid hierarchies. Now, you may think that the astronaut community, because it came out of the military community, has a very hierarchical role, rigid sort of caste system. It doesn't. I've been on many, many teams made up of astronauts, and if you ask them how do they define their status, if we put them all in a room, all the members of the of the Association of Space Explorers in a room, which they do, they get into a room. Would you say that their status is defined by who's the oldest or who had the highest level in whatever military they came out of or whatever. They go by class. And Rick was telling me they even nickname the classes. So they go by, if you're the class of 49, the class of 59, the class of 69, they go by classes. So they're trying to, in that way, they're trying to reduce the status. So it doesn't become a situation in which the guy that flies the shuttle, it has more status than the guy who's doing some of the experiments on the shuttles, or vice versa. So that's how they're trying to reduce status. So you want to avoid rigid hierarchies. So let's recap. What's the leader's role? The leader's role is to cultivate resilience and adaptation by helping people avoid simplifying their interpretations, by helping people to be preoccupied with failure. You always want to think about what stupid thing could happen next. Helping people to be sensitive to their operations and organizing around expertise. If I know Joe over there is a better mechanic than Sam over here, I want to make sure Joe's on the job fixing that space shuttle. But I want to bring up another fact about leadership, too. And this is the one I mentioned at the beginning. Most of the time, we're operating as interdependent, either organizations or groups. So I built, this is purely out of my head, I built this little thing that could be looked at as interdependent departments or interdependent organizations. I think for the first time now we've had we probably had a second one, but the Big O accident that showed us the importance of interdependence among organizations was the Macondo. Because you had Halliburton in there, you had Transocean in there, you had all the people who bring food to the rig in there, you had the company in there, BP in there, you had everybody there, and probably everybody had a role. So you'll see I put this little blue guy out there because he's the outlier. He's not interdependent with anybody, but all the rest of them are interdependent. So how could we look at the components of a system? We could look at them as, in terms of the hardware they use, the kind of organization they use, the operators, the structure, the procedure, and the interfaces of all those. That's one way of identifying a system. And it may be good for some purposes. If I identified my system that way, I may be able to solve some problem. But another way to identify systems is department after department. The marketing department's interdependent with the production department, which is interdependent with the vice president's office, etc. Well, here's another way to look at a system as different organizations. And finally, you could look at a system as I would suggest that BP look at theirs by looking at what the organization is doing with regard to some focal organization or what these organizations have in mind. The legal system, the regulation system, the supplier, all these organizations, what their choices would be. Okay, now let's take the rest of this, a little time left, and talk about what kind of leadership is best in these systems. And you're all dealing with systems, whether you think you are or not. Okay, what kind of leadership is best? Well, on the left-hand side, I have what's known in the trade, and that's my trade, which is organizational science, as transactional leadership, and I'm going to skip over that because it's not best for our systems anyway. The kind of leadership that's best for our systems is transformational leadership, which provides a vision and a sense of mission. It instills pride, gains respect, and has trust. It inspires motivation. It promotes intelligence and careful problem solving, and it gives personal attention, or it coaches. So I want you to think about that kind of leadership as being the best kind of leadership. And some people have it, and some people can learn it. And then there are those of the rest of us. And we neither have nor can learn. Okay, now how does transformational leadership work? It helps your people be creative, it helps you be creative, it encourages your employees to be creative, it they will be familiar with and agree with the organization's strategic goals. If you don't agree with your organization's strategic goals, you better go somewhere else. And if the organization finds that out, it really better get rid of you. Encourages followers to pursue ambitious goals because that's what makes them reach. And Rick talked about that. You can go anywhere you want. You need to reach. Believe organizational goals are personally important. He certainly believed his organization's goals were personally important to him. And it encourages you to have a vision about something and your employees to have a vision. Okay, now if you're to provide team leadership, what are the challenges? You have to learn to share information. You have to learn to trust others. Here comes that word trust again. You have to learn to give up authority. Oh my goodness. Give up authority. Let the guy with the expertise do it. You have to understand when to intervene. And what are your common responsibilities? You have to coach. You're the coach. You have to facilitate the other guy in doing something so he'll know how to do it. And I'll tell you a great story about that. And you have to handle disciplinary problems. Before I get through the end of this list, I'll tell you a great story about failure at facilitating. Many of you know about the USS Forrestal fire, in which, and you've seen it in the movies. Many of you are too young to know about it, but you've seen it in the movies. And the USS Forrestal was one of our aircraft carriers, and she was out in the Tonkin Gulf, and she was loading. She was just ready to take a bunch of airplanes off to go on a bombing run. And just as she got ready to do that, two planes were landing, and the bombs exploded on the deck and resulted in what we call a cook-off. The cook-off was completed by crispy critters. Those are dead guys on the ship. So we have two things here. We have a cook-off and crispy critters. And the first guys to, and by the way, John McCain was just landing on the ship at the time. And I don't know how he saved himself. If I were to ever meet Senator McCain, I would not ask him about his experiences as a POW in the Vietnam War. I'd ask him about landing on the Forrestal during a cook-off. And the guys that were trained to put the fire out, there were a few of them, they were trained. They got right in there, did what they were supposed to do, and they all died. So now they had no one trained to put the fire out, and the guys who came along to put the fire out were not trained and often made the fire worse. So the Navy changed its procedures after that time, today, every guy on the deck is a trained firefighter, so you don't lose them. So that's an example of not facilitating the job so that it could be done by everybody. You just had a few guys there. And then you have to, so there I am on that one, and you have to then handle disciplinary problems, review performance, and you have to train. And when you get through training, you train some more. And then when you get through training, you train some more. And finally, you have to communicate. And when you get through communicating, you have to communicate some more. And then when you get through communicating, you have to communicate some more. So let me finish up by giving you 4 roles for team leaders. One is as a liaison with external constituencies. All those astronauts are, even the old ones, are today liaison with external communities. That's how they get the support from people who are paying their bills like me. I pay the astronauts, so they want me to like them. And so they do things all over the community and all over the places as liaisons with constituencies. Next, they're troubleshooters. All the astronauts are troubleshooters. They troubleshoot for one another. So they're troubleshooters, basically. Next, they're conflict managers. They try to reduce conflict in their own groups. And I will bet you've got a lot of folks out on those rigs who are conflict managers. And they're sometimes hard to identify. But if you see them, you ought to encourage them and you ought to train them. You find out what the source of conflict is, who's involved, what are the issues, all kinds of things about conflict, and then they try to resolve the conflict. Next, they're coaches. They aren't really authoritarian bosses, they're coaches, and they coach people about what to do. And I know that the fighter pilot community in everybody's Navy, but since only a couple nations run aircraft carriers, it would be a few navies. That's their job. It didn't used to be, but the fighter pilot's job now is to coach. Now, but we're in this unfortunate situation today where leadership often means e-leadership or electronic leadership. You're not always there. And so you can't see what the guy's doing, so we have to rely on electronic leadership. And that's very important in industries like the energy industry, like the maritime industry. And we have a lot of obvious examples of e-leadership where somebody's just not there. But all the leadership research we have today in management focuses primarily on face-to-face leadership. So we know less about e-leadership than we should. But we can take a couple of guesses as to how you might do it, how to make it work. First, carefully choose your words. How many times have you lifted up the phone or even gotten an email with nasty, nasty, nasty stuff in it that nobody would want to hear and everybody would avoid? So watch carefully to pick your words. Structure your phrases appropriately so somebody might want to receive them. If you're in a situation where you want to get somebody to stop something, you don't say, "Damn it, that's just a bunch of shit." That's not going to get him to stop anything. It's going to get him to call you names, him or her to call you names. What you should say is something like, "Jim, why do you suppose we're doing it like this? Could we maybe think of an alternative which doesn't arouse the defenses quite as rapidly as being mean?" So you've got to be careful about that. And make sure your message tone reflects the emotion you want to send. And often we don't. We're not careful. We're not careful enough. And choose a comfortable style. I put emoticons up here, and my colleague said, "Is that a misspelling?" An emoticon is those little faces that come up on those little cute laughing faces that come up on your computer. But you could use those, and you often do. You know the one where you put the smile in or the frown in after some message you've sent? That's a homemade one, but you can pick them up. Okay, let me wrap up and tell you what we talked about. We noticed that the unexpected happens. We define a high reliability organization. We discussed the leader's role in a high reliability organization. We noted that organizations are really made up of interdependent departments, and organizations are themselves a part of interdependent organizations. We noted that there are different system components, and you can define a system any way that's useful to you, by department, by who's the boss, by anything you can think of. We said something about transformational leadership being the kind of leadership that guides and brings out the best of you and helps you learn. We noted responsibilities of team leaders, and then I noted that most of our leadership today, particularly in some of our organizations, is really electronic leadership and what we have to do about that. And I really added that on because I know your industry is one of those industries where a lot of that is electronic leadership. Thank you.